The sun was bleeding crimson across the Texas horizon when Eliza May Sullivan first felt the sharp bite of stone against her bare feet. Each step sent fresh pain shooting through her soles, but she clutched her infant daughter tighter and pressed forward. Behind her, the thunder of hooves grew louder, accompanied by the harsh curses of men who had once called themselves family. "You won't get far, you Jezebel," the voice of her father-in-law, Cornelius Sullivan, carried across the dusty plains like a whip crack. "That child belongs to the Sullivan name." Eliza's arms trembled as she adjusted the weight of little Sarah, barely 3 months old, wrapped in nothing but a thin cotton blanket. The baby whimpered softly, sensing her mother's fear. The ranch house she'd fled stood like a dark monument against the fading light, its windows glowing with lantern flame, a prison she'd endured for 2 years since her husband Thomas had died of fever. The Sullivans had never accepted her. To them, she was nothing but a saloon girl Thomas had foolishly married during a drunken spell in San Antonio, when Sarah was born with her mother's dark hair instead of the Sullivans' distinctive red. Their suspicions had turned to accusations. "Bastard child," her sister-in-law Margaret had spat just hours ago, yanking Eliza by the hair. "You think we're fools? Thomas was away trading cattle when that babe was conceived. We've done the counting." The accusations were lies. Eliza had been faithful to Thomas even in his absence, waiting by the window each night for his return. But grief and liquor had clouded the family's judgment, and when Cornelius declared the child would be sent away to an orphanage, or worse, Eliza knew she had no choice but to run. Her feet found the old cattle trail that wound through the mesquite and prickly pear. Blood mixed with dust, creating dark patches on the parched earth. The weight of Sarah seemed to double with each passing minute, but Eliza dared not slow. She could hear the jingle of spurs now. The snorting of horses pushed hard. "Circle around by Miller's Creek," Cornelius barked to his sons. "Cut her off before she reaches the settlement." Eliza's heart sank. The settlement was her only hope. Surely someone there would show mercy to a mother and child, but Miller's Creek ran directly across her path, and the Sullivan boys knew every shortcut in the county. The mesquite thorns tore at her dress, already worn thin from months of hard labor. Margaret had made sure Eliza earned her keep, scrubbing floors and tending chickens from dawn to dusk. Her hands, once smooth, bore the calluses and cuts of servitude. But none of that mattered now. Only Sarah mattered. The baby began to cry in earnest, her thin wail cutting through the evening air. Eliza tried to soothe her, humming a lullaby her own mother had sung years ago, before cholera took her. But her voice cracked with thirst and fear. "Hush, sweet girl," she whispered. "Mama's going to find us somewhere safe, somewhere they can't hurt us." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Where could they possibly go? She had no money, no family, no friends who would dare stand against the Sullivans. The ranch controlled half the county, their cattle brand known from here to Fort Worth. Cornelius served as justice of the peace, his word law in these parts. A coyote howled in the distance, and Eliza shuddered. Night was falling fast, and the desert would show no mercy to a woman alone with an infant. Already the temperature was dropping, the heat of day giving way to bone-chilling cold. Her feet struck something sharp, a broken bottle left by some passing traveler, and she cried out before she could stop herself. The sound echoed across the emptiness, and she heard the horses change direction, heading straight for her. Through the gathering darkness, she spotted a cluster of buildings ahead, the settlement of Bitter Springs. Population 93 souls, mostly German immigrants and former soldiers seeking a new life after the war. Smoke rose from chimneys, and lamplight beckoned like stars fallen to earth. Eliza forced herself to run faster, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Sarah had gone quiet, which frightened her more than the crying. Was the baby too cold, too weak? She couldn't stop to check. The first house sat on the edge of town, a modest adobe structure with a vegetable garden protected by a low fence. Eliza recognized it. The Kaufman family. Decent folks who bought eggs from the Sullivan Ranch. Surely they would help. She stumbled up to the door, her fist raised to knock, when she heard Cornelius's voice carrying clear in the still air. Anyone harboring that woman will answer to me. She's stolen Sullivan property." Through the window, Eliza saw Frau Kaufmann's face appear, then quickly disappear as the curtains drew shut. The door remained closed. Desperation clawed at her throat. She moved to the next house, then the next. At each one, curtains twitched. Doors stayed barred. The town knew better than to cross the Sullivans. Justice might be blind elsewhere, but in Bitter Springs, it wore Cornelia Sullivan's face. "Please," Eliza whispered at the last door. "That of the minister. Please, for the love of God, help us." Reverend Pritchard's voice came through the wood, thin and apologetic. "I'm sorry, child. I cannot interfere in family matters. Return to your kin and seek forgiveness." Forgiveness, as if she were the one who needed absolving. The sound of horses grew deafening. Eliza clutched Sarah and ran toward the far edge of town, where the desert stretched endless and unforgiving. Her feet left bloody prints on the packed earth of Main Street, a trail even a blind man could follow. Beyond the last building, the land opened into vast nothingness. Sagebrush and stone, arroyo and shadow. No shelter, no water, no hope, but still better than what waited behind. Eliza plunged into the darkness, her body moving on instinct alone. The stars emerged one by one, cold and distant as the hearts of those who'd turned her away. She thought of Thomas, of his gentle hands and whiskey breath, of promises made in a San Antonio chapel. He'd sworn to protect her, to give her a life of dignity. Now she ran barefoot through thorns and stone, his family baying for her blood like hounds after a fox. The ground suddenly gave way beneath her feet, a shallow ravine hidden by darkness. She tumbled forward, twisting desperately to protect Sarah from the fall. Her shoulder struck stone, sending lightning through her body, but she kept the baby safe, cushioned against her chest. Lying in the dust, hearing the horses draw ever closer, Eliza May Sullivan pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead and made a promise. "I won't let them take you. Whatever comes, we face it together." The stars watched, silent witnesses to a mother's desperate flight. And somewhere in that vast Texas night, fate was already shifting, preparing to place a different rider on a different trail, one whose arrival would change everything. But for now, there was only the running, the fear, and the fierce love that kept Eliza moving when her body screamed to stop. She struggled to her feet, adjusted Sarah's weight, and disappeared deeper into the waiting darkness. The moon had risen full and merciless by the time Eliza reached the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, a settlement 20 miles from Bitter Springs. Her feet were beyond pain now, wrapped in strips torn from her petticoat, the cloth already soaked through with blood. Sarah had cried herself into an exhausted sleep, her tiny body burning with the beginnings of fever. Cedar Ridge was smaller than Bitter Springs, just a handful of buildings clustered around a well. But Eliza knew one person here, Martha Henley, who had worked as a seamstress before marrying a homesteader. They'd met at a church social years ago, before Thomas's death, when life still held promise. The Henley cabin sat apart from the others, surrounded by a failed attempt at a garden. Smoke drifted from the chimney, and through the window, Eliza could see the warm glow of lamplight. She limped to the door, each step an agony, and knocked with what little strength remained. Martha appeared in the doorway, her face shifting from surprise to alarm as she took in Eliza's condition. "Merciful heavens, Eliza Sullivan? Please," Eliza gasped, swaying on her feet. "My baby. She's sick. Just some water. Anything." Martha's expression hardened, though sympathy flickered in her eyes. "You can't be here. Word's already spread from Bitter Springs. The Sullivans sent riders through an hour ago. Martha, please. We were friends once." "That was before." Martha glanced nervously over her shoulder. "My husband has contracts with the Sullivan Ranch. We can't afford to lose their business. You understand?" Eliza didn't understand, couldn't comprehend how fear of losing money could outweigh basic human mercy. But she saw the resolution in Martha's face, the way her hand gripped the doorframe. "At least," Eliza's voice broke, "could you look at Sarah? She's burning up. Just tell me what to do for the fever." Martha's resolve wavered. She stepped forward, peering at the bundle in Eliza's arms. Sarah's face was flushed, her breathing shallow and quick. "Willow bark tea," Martha said quietly. "Cool water on her forehead. Keep her wrapped but not too tight." She paused, then added, "There's a creek 2 miles north. Follow the cottonwoods." "Martha?" A man's voice boomed from inside. "Who's at the door?" Fear flashed across Martha's face. "Nobody. Samuel. Just checking the wind." She pressed something into Eliza's hand, a small bundle wrapped in cheesecloth. "Bread and dried meat. It's all I can do. Now go, before he sees you." The door closed with finality, leaving Eliza alone again in the darkness. She looked down at the meager provisions, tears burning her eyes. It was more than anyone else had given, but would it be enough? North, 2 miles. Follow the cottonwoods. Eliza turned from the settlement, from the last pretense of civilization, and headed into the wilderness. The moon lit her way, casting long shadows from the scattered mesquite and sage every few steps. She paused to touch Sarah's forehead, whispering prayers she wasn't sure anyone heard. The 2 miles felt like 20. Her makeshift bandages unraveled, leaving her feet bare again against the unforgiving ground. Thorns embedded themselves deep, each one a fresh torment. But worse than the physical pain was the knowledge that she was truly alone now. No more settlements lay within walking distance. No more doors to knock upon. No more pleas for mercy to be denied. When she finally heard the whisper of water over stone, Eliza nearly sobbed with relief. The cottonwoods stood like sentinels along the creek bank, their leaves rustling in the night breeze. She collapsed beside the water, laying Sarah carefully on a patch of grass. The baby's fever had worsened. Her tiny body radiated heat, and her breathing came in little gasps. Eliza tore another strip from her dress, soaked it in the cool creek water, and laid it across Sarah's forehead. The baby stirred but didn't wake. "Stay with me, little one," Eliza murmured. "Stay with Mama." She forced herself to eat some of the bread Martha had given her, though it stuck in her throat like sawdust. She needed strength to feed Sarah, to keep going. But where could they go? The wilderness stretched endlessly in all directions, hostile and unforgiving. As she sat by the creek, bathing Sarah's fevered skin, Eliza heard it, the distant sound of horses. Her blood turned to ice. The Sullivans hadn't given up. Of course they hadn't. Cornelius would track her to the ends of the earth rather than let her escape with what he considered stolen property. She gathered Sarah and stumbled along the creek bank, searching desperately for somewhere to hide. The cottonwoods offered little cover, their trunks too narrow, the brush too sparse. Behind her, the sound of pursuit grew louder. Then she saw it. A cut bank where spring floods had carved a shallow cave beneath the roots of an ancient cottonwood. It wasn't much, barely deep enough to conceal them, but it was all she had. Eliza squeezed inside, pressing herself against the damp earth. Sarah clutched to her chest. The horses approached, their hooves splashing through the shallow water. Eliza held her breath, one hand gently covering Sarah's mouth. "She came this way," one of the Sullivan boys said. She recognized the voice. Matthew, the eldest. "Look at the blood on those rocks. Probably collapsed somewhere," another voice added. "James, the middle son. No woman could keep going with feet torn up like that." "Then find her body," Cornelius commanded. "I won't have it said that a Sullivan let a thief escape. That child carries our blood, tainted or not." They searched for what felt like hours, torchlight dancing across the water, boots tramping up and down the creek bank. Once, Matthew passed so close that Eliza could see the mud on his boots, smell the tobacco on his clothes. Sarah stirred, a tiny whimper escaping her lips. Eliza pressed her closer, humming almost inaudibly. The same lullaby from before. The baby settled, and Matthew moved on, calling to his brothers that this section was clear. Finally, miraculously, the sounds faded. The Sullivans had moved downstream, following false trails or simple hope. Eliza waited until she could no longer hear even an echo of their presence before crawling from her hiding place. Sarah's fever had broken while they hid, her skin cooling, her breathing easier. It seemed impossible, a miracle born of creek water and desperation. Eliza kissed her daughter's forehead, tasting salt and earth. But now what? Dawn would come soon, and with it, renewed pursuit. The Sullivans would return, would search every inch of creek bank, and Eliza had nowhere left to run. Her feet were ruined, her strength nearly gone. The wilderness that had seemed like escape now felt like a trap, vast and pitiless. She made her way upstream, away from where the Sullivans had searched. Each step was agony, but she forced herself forward. Sarah needed shelter, real shelter, food, medicine, all things Eliza couldn't provide. As the first pale light touched the eastern sky, Eliza found herself at the creek's source, a small spring bubbling from beneath a limestone outcrop. Beyond it, the land rose into low hills dotted with juniper and oak, and there, carved by wind and time, was a shallow cave. It wasn't much, but it was defensible, hidden, dry. Eliza crawled inside and collapsed against the cool stone wall. Sarah stirred and began to fuss. Hungry. No doubt. Eliza opened her dress and let the baby nurse, though she feared her milk was thin from exhaustion and poor food. As Sarah fed, Eliza looked out at the brightening landscape. Somewhere out there, the Sullivans were regrouping, planning, hunting, somewhere. People lived in warm houses with full cupboards and soft beds. People who had turned their backs on a desperate mother and sick child. She thought of Thomas again, of his promises and failures. He'd been weak. She knew that. Too fond of whiskey, too eager to please his father. But he'd been kind in his way, gentle when sober. He would have been horrified by his family's treatment of his widow and child. Or would he? Had she ever really known him at all? Sarah finished nursing and gazed up at her mother with dark, solemn eyes, so alert for one so young, as if she understood the weight of their situation. Eliza managed a smile, touching the baby's cheek. "We're going to survive this," she whispered. "Somehow, we're going to survive." But even as she spoke the words, she felt their hollowness. Survival required more than determination. It required food, water, shelter, protection, all things she couldn't provide alone in this unforgiving land. The sun climbed higher, painting the hills gold and casting sharp shadows. Soon it would be full day, too hot to travel, too bright to hide. Eliza closed her eyes, cradling Sarah close, and for the first time since fleeing the Sullivan Ranch, she allowed herself to weep. The tears came silent and bitter, for all that was lost and all that seemed impossible to find. But even in her despair, she held her daughter tight. Whatever came next, whatever fate awaited them in this harsh country, they would face it together. The cave offered temporary shelter, but it was no home, and somewhere beyond these hills, destiny was already stirring, preparing to bring a lone rider down a dusty trail. But Eliza knew nothing of that yet. All she knew was the weight of her child in her arms and the certainty that she would rather die than let the Sullivans take Sarah away. James Everett had been tracking the mountain cat for 3 days when he found the blood on the stones. Fresh blood. Human blood. Mixed with smaller prints that told a story of desperate flight. He dismounted from his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Dusty, and knelt to examine the trail. The tracks were unusual. Bare feet, small and delicate, accompanied by drops of crimson that painted a path of suffering across the harsh landscape. Someone was hurt, running. His weathered hands traced the outline of one footprint, a woman, from the size of it. James had lived on the edges of civilization for 5 years now, ever since the war ended and he'd returned to find his family farm burned, his wife and son dead from fever. The wilderness had become his home, his cabin tucked into a canyon where few men ventured. He'd come out here to forget, to let the silence heal what words couldn't touch. But blood on stones called to something deeper than his desire for solitude. He followed the trail upstream, Dusty picking her way carefully along the creek bank. The rising sun cast long shadows through the cottonwoods, and morning birds began their chorus. Any other day, he might have stopped to appreciate the peace. Today, urgency pulled him forward. The blood trail led to a limestone outcrop where a small spring bubbled from the earth. And there, in a shallow cave barely deep enough to be called shelter, he found them. The woman was unconscious, curled around an infant like a shell protecting its pearl. Her dress was torn to rags. Her feet, James winced at the sight of her feet, torn and swollen beyond recognition. The baby stirred at his approach, dark eyes focusing on him with unsettling awareness. James had seen plenty of suffering in his 38 years. The war had shown him what men could do to each other, what pain looked like in all its forms. But something about this scene, a mother clutching her child even in unconsciousness, struck him with unexpected force. He approached slowly, speaking soft words meant for spooked horses. "Easy now. I'm not here to hurt you." The woman's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, confusion clouded her gaze. Then fear sharpened her features, and she pressed herself against the cave wall, pulling the baby closer. "Stay back," she rasped, her voice barely more than a whisper. I'll fight you if I have to." James raised his hands, showing empty palms. "No need for fighting. Ma'am, name's James Everett. I've got a cabin about 5 miles from here. You look like you could use some help." She studied him with hollow eyes, taking in his worn leather vest, the day's growth of beard, the rifle slung across his back. He knew what he looked like. A man who'd chosen the wilderness over people, whose clothes spoke of practical need rather than fashion. But he hoped she could also see what he wasn't. Not a Sullivan rider, not a threat to her child. "I can't pay you," she said finally. "Didn't ask for payment. People always want something." The bitterness in her voice spoke of recent betrayals. James settled onto his haunches, careful to keep distance between them. "That's true enough. What I want is to not find a dead woman and baby in my hunting grounds come tomorrow. Bad for the conscience." A ghost of something, not quite a smile, touched her cracked lips. "Practical man. Practicals kept me alive this long." He gestured to her feet. "Those need tending before infection sets in. I've got medical supplies at the cabin, food, clean water. You can decide what to do after you're healed up," she wavered, maternal instinct warring with desperate need. The baby made a small sound, and her resolve crumbled. "What's your name?" James asked gently. She hesitated. Then, Eliza Sullivan. This is Sarah." The Sullivan name meant nothing to him. He kept away from local politics and gossip. But he filed it away, noting how she said it like it tasted bad. "Well, Eliza Sullivan, we need to get you on this horse. Can you stand?" She tried, using the cave wall for support, but her legs buckled immediately. Without thinking, James moved forward and caught her before she could fall. She stiffened in his arms, the baby between them like a small, warm barrier. "Sorry," he muttered, but didn't let go. She weighed next to nothing, bird bones and determination. This close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the way hunger had sharpened her features. "I can walk," she insisted, though they both knew it for a lie. "Sure you can, but Dusty here would feel mighty offended if you didn't let her carry you. She's got a gentle gait, won't jostle the little one." He helped her to the horse, pretending not to notice how she gritted her teeth against the pain. Getting her mounted was a challenge. She refused to let go of Sarah, and her damaged feet couldn't bear weight. Finally, James simply lifted them both, settling Eliza sideways in the saddle with Sarah secure in her arms. "I'll walk alongside," he said, taking Dusty's reins. "Cabin's not far." They moved slowly through the morning heat, following game trails James knew by heart. Eliza swayed with exhaustion but kept her back straight, her arms locked around her daughter. Once, when they crossed a rough patch, she gasped at the jarring motion. "Sorry," James said. "Ground's uneven through here. I've had worse." He believed her. Whatever had driven her into the wilderness barefoot with an infant hadn't been a small trouble. The blood, the torn clothes, the desperation in her eyes, it all spoke of flight from something terrible. They didn't talk much. James wasn't a man for unnecessary words, and Eliza seemed to be conserving what little strength she had. But he found himself glancing back at her, noting the way sunlight caught in her dark hair, the fierce protection in how she held her child. His cabin appeared just as the noon heat became unbearable, a simple structure of logs and mud chinking, built into the side of a canyon where a spring provided year-round water. A small corral held 2 horses. Smoke drifted from the chimney. He'd left the fire banked that morning. "It's not much," James said, suddenly aware of how rough his home must look to someone used to proper houses. "It's shelter," Eliza replied, and the gratitude in her voice made him uncomfortable. He helped her down from Dusty, catching her again when her legs gave out. This time, she didn't protest, too exhausted for pride. He carried her to the cabin. She weighed no more than a sack of grain, and settled her on his one chair. The cabin's interior was sparse but clean. A bed with a straw mattress, a table, the chair, shelves holding supplies, his rifle rack on the wall, a few books, not much else. A bachelor's quarters, functional and lonely. "Let me look at those feet," James said, filling a basin with water from the kettle. Eliza hesitated, clutching Sarah. The baby needs a mother who doesn't die from blood poisoning. Let me help." She must have heard something in his voice, the echo of old grief, perhaps because she nodded and let him kneel before her. Her feet were worse up close, embedded with thorns and stone fragments, the skin torn in dozens of places. James had doctored plenty of wounds, his own and his horse's, but he worked with extra care now, cleaning each cut, removing debris with tweezers. Eliza never made a sound, though her knuckles went white where she gripped the chair. "You're good at this," she said through clenched teeth. Had practice. He didn't elaborate. Didn't mention the field hospitals where he'd learned that infected wounds killed more soldiers than bullets. When he finished, her feet were wrapped in clean bandages torn from his spare shirt. He stood, his knees protesting the long crouch, and went to his food stores. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked. "Yesterday. A friend gave me some bread." Some friend, he thought, who sent her on instead of offering shelter. But he kept the judgment from his voice. "I've got beans and salt pork, nothing fancy, but it'll fill your stomach." As he prepared the simple meal, Eliza tended to Sarah, changing her wrappings with practiced efficiency. The baby seemed healthy despite their ordeal, alert and responsive. When Eliza nursed her, James turned away, busying himself with unnecessary tasks to give them privacy. The domestic scene stirred memories he'd buried deep. Another woman nursing a child, another life when his hands had known gentleness instead of just survival. He pushed the thoughts away. The past was dead. Dwelling on it helped nothing. When the food was ready, Eliza ate like someone who'd learned not to count on the next meal. Between bites, she studied him with those dark, wary eyes. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why what? Why help us? You don't know me. I could be a criminal for all you know." James considered his answer. "Maybe you are, but that baby's not. And in my experience, criminals don't usually run barefoot through thorns to protect their young." She looked down at Sarah, now sleeping peacefully. "No, I suppose they don't." The afternoon stretched quiet between them. James went about his usual tasks, tending the horses, checking his trap lines, but found himself returning to the cabin more often than necessary. Each time, Eliza was there, holding Sarah, staring at something only she could see. As evening approached, she finally spoke again. "They'll come looking. The people I'm running from, they have money, influence. They won't stop. Let them come," James said simply. She shook her head. "You don't understand. These aren't reasonable people. They'll hurt you for helping me. I've been hurt before. This is different." "Maybe." He met her gaze steadily. "But I made my choice when I brought you here. I don't go back on my choices." Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, perhaps, or the first tiny crack in her armor of distrust. She opened her mouth to say more, but exhaustion finally claimed her. Her eyes drooped, her hold on Sarah loosening. James caught the baby before she could slip, lifting the small weight with hands that remembered another child. Another time. Sarah blinked up at him, solemn and trusting. "Your mama's tough," he told her softly, "but even tough needs rest sometimes." He carried Eliza to the bed, her body limp with sleep. She didn't wake as he settled her on the mattress, didn't stir as he placed Sarah beside her. In sleep, the lines of fear and pain smoothed from her face, leaving her looking younger, vulnerable. James spread his bedroll on the floor near the door. Anyone coming for them would have to go through him first. He'd made his choice, as he'd said. Now he'd live with it. Wherever it led. Outside. Night gathered over the canyon. Coyotes called in the distance, and an owl hunted on silent wings. The wilderness continued its ancient rhythms, indifferent to human drama. But inside the cabin, something had changed. The loneliness that had filled these walls for 5 years had cracked, letting in something James couldn't yet name. He lay on his bedroll, rifle within reach, and kept watch. Tomorrow would bring questions, decisions, probably trouble. But tonight, a woman and child slept safely under his roof. For now, that was enough. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Eliza woke to find James kneeling beside her, carefully unwrapping the bandages on her feet. His hands were gentle but efficient, and she bit back a gasp as the fabric pulled away from the wounds. "Sorry to wake you," he said without looking up. "These need cleaning again. Infection's the real danger now." Sarah lay sleeping in a makeshift cradle James had fashioned from a wooden crate and spare blankets. The sight of it, this small kindness from a stranger, made Eliza's throat tight. "How long did I sleep?" "Most of the day. It's near evening now." She tried to sit up, but he placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Easy. You lost a lot of blood." The cabin was warm, filled with the scent of wood smoke and something else, herbs, she realized. Bundles of dried plants hung from the rafters. Yarrow, willow bark, echinacea, medicine herbs. "You know healing," she observed as he worked. "Some, learned from necessity." He cleaned each wound with water steeped in herbs, his focus absolute. "My mother was part Cherokee, taught me about plants before." He trailed off, jaw tightening. Eliza recognized the look of someone guarding old pain. She'd seen it in her own mirror often enough. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the fire's whisper and Sarah's soft breathing. The lamp cast a golden glow over James's weathered features, highlighting the silver threads in his dark hair, the lines carved by sun and sorrow. "These are healing well," he said finally, applying a salve that smelled of pine and honey. "No sign of infection. You're lucky." Lucky. The word tasted bitter. "I suppose that's one way to see it." He glanced up then, and their eyes met. In the lamplight, his were the color of river stones, gray-green and unreadable. "You're alive. Your daughter's alive. That's more than many can say. You speak from experience." "I do." He didn't elaborate. And she didn't push. Some stories weren't meant for sharing with near strangers, no matter how kind those strangers might be. When he finished rewrapping her feet, he moved to the fire, stirring something in a pot that hung over the flames. The smell made Eliza's stomach clench with hunger. "Rabbit stew," he said. "Nothing fancy, but it'll strengthen you." He ladled the stew into 2 bowls, handing her one along with a spoon carved from horn. She ate slowly, savoring the rich broth, the tender meat. It was the first hot meal she'd had in days. "You live alone out here," she said. It wasn't a question. 5 years now. Don't you get lonely?" He considered this, chewing thoughtfully. "Loneliness and solitude aren't the same thing. I chose solitude, and now you have uninvited guests disturbing your peace." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Life has a way of ignoring our choices sometimes." Sarah stirred in her makeshift cradle, making small, hungry sounds. Eliza set aside her bowl and reached for her daughter, wincing at the movement. "Let me," James said, lifting the baby with surprising gentleness. He handed Sarah to her mother, then turned his back while Eliza nursed. She studied the broad lines of his shoulders, the way he stood guard even here in his own home. Everything about him spoke of capability, of a man who'd learned to rely only on himself. Yet he'd taken them in without question, tended her wounds, shared his food. "I should tell you," she said quietly, "about who's hunting us. You have a right to know what you've invited into your home." He didn't turn around. "Only if you want to. The Sullivans own half the county back in Bitter Springs. Cornelia Sullivan is my father-in-law. Was." She swallowed hard. "My husband Thomas died 8 months ago. When Sarah was born, she didn't look like they expected. Dark hair instead of red. They decided she wasn't Thomas's child." "Was she?" The question was neutral, without judgment. "Yes. Thomas was gone often, trading cattle, but he was home when—" "Yes, she's his, but they didn't want to believe it. Said I dishonored the family name, that Sarah was proof of my sin." James remained silent, letting her tell it at her own pace. "They were going to take her away. Send her to an orphanage, or—" Her voice cracked. "I couldn't let them, so I ran." "And they followed. They'll keep following. Cornelius Sullivan doesn't forgive what he sees as theft, and in his mind, I stole a Sullivan child, tainted or not." Now James did turn, his expression thoughtful. "Bitter Springs is 3 days' ride from here. They don't know this country like I do. They have money. They can hire trackers. Maybe." He moved to the window, peering out at the gathering dusk. "But this canyon's well hidden. Not many know about it. And those who do know better than to bring trouble here." Something in his tone suggested stories untold. A reputation, perhaps. Eliza found herself wondering what had driven him to this isolation. What ghosts haunted his careful solitude? Sarah finished nursing and gazed up at her mother with those dark, knowing eyes. Eliza traced a finger along her daughter's cheek, marveling at the soft perfection of her skin. "She's beautiful," James said quietly. "She's everything." Eliza's fierce love colored the words. "I would die before letting them take her." "Hopefully it won't come to that." He moved about the cabin, banking the fire for the night, checking the door's heavy bar. His rifle stood within easy reach, and Eliza noticed a revolver on the table. Recently cleaned. "You're expecting trouble," she observed. "I always expect trouble. That way I'm rarely disappointed." "I'm sorry. We've brought danger to your door." He shrugged. "Danger and I are old acquaintances. At least this time it's in service of something worthwhile." The cabin settled into evening quiet. Outside, a screech owl called, and the wind whispered through the canyon. The domestic peace felt fragile, temporary, but Eliza treasured it nonetheless. When had she last felt safe? Not since Thomas died. Certainly, maybe not even before that. James spread his bedroll near the door again, his long frame barely fitting in the space. "You should sleep. Your body needs time to heal. What about you?" "I'll keep watch. Sleep light anyway." She wanted to protest, to insist they share the watch, but exhaustion pulled at her bones. Sarah was already drowsing, milk-drunk and content. "James," she said softly. He looked up from checking his rifle. "Thank you. I know the words aren't enough, but thank you." He nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Rest now. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." Eliza lay back on the narrow bed. Sarah tucked against her side. The straw mattress felt like luxury after nights on cold ground. She watched James through half-closed eyes. This strange, quiet man who'd appeared like something out of a frontier tale. He sat with his back against the door, rifle across his knees, alert but relaxed. The firelight carved his profile in sharp relief, strong nose, firm jaw, eyes that missed nothing. Not handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about him, a solidness that promised safety. She thought of Thomas, with his easy smile and weakness for whiskey, his grand promises that evaporated like morning dew. He'd been handsome, charming, everything a young woman thought she wanted, but when trouble came, he'd been absent, leaving her to face his family's cruelty alone. This man was different. This man put himself between danger and those who needed protection, not from obligation, but from some internal code she was only beginning to understand. Can't sleep. His voice was low, designed not to wake the baby. Too many thoughts. I know the feeling. Tell me something, she said impulsively. About before, about who you were before. This. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I had a farm in East Texas. Good land, near a creek. A wife named Mary. A boy called Benjamin. The past tense told its own story. The war, she guessed. Fever took them while I was gone playing soldier. Came back to empty graves and burned fields. Nothing left to stay for. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. But she heard the lie in it. Some wounds never became a long time ago. They stayed fresh beneath the scar tissue, aching with every change in weather. Is that why you know healing? From the war? Partly. Learned some in the field hospitals. Learned more from staying alive after. The conversation drifted into silence. Eliza felt sleep pulling at her again, but fought it, not wanting to leave him alone with his watch and his memories. You should know, she said drowsily. I'm not usually so helpless. I can work, cook, tend animals. I won't be a burden once I'm healed. Didn't think you would be. I mean it. I'll earn our keep. Eliza. His use of her name made her eyes open fully. You don't owe me anything. You needed help. I gave it. That's all. That's not all, she whispered. But sleep was claiming her now, pulling her down into dreams of running through thorns while a quiet man stood guard against the darkness. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness took her was James silhouetted against the dying fire, a sentinel carved from shadow and stubborn honor. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt something she'd thought lost forever. She felt protected. The night deepened around the cabin. Coyotes sang their ancient songs in the distance, and the wind carried the scent of sage and coming rain. Inside, a damaged woman and her child slept peacefully while a lonely man kept watch, his presence a wall between them and whatever dangers the darkness might bring. In the makeshift cradle, Sarah slept with the perfect trust of innocence. She knew nothing of the drama that had brought them here, the violence that stalked them, the unexpected grace of strangers. She knew only warmth and milk and her mother's love. And perhaps, in her infant dreams, she sensed something more, the solid presence of the man by the door, the safety he represented, the possibility of a future different from the one her blood family had planned. The fire burned low, casting longer shadows. James added another log, careful not to make too much noise. He'd forgotten how to share space with others, how to modulate his movements for sleeping company. But the forgetting felt like remembering something else, something he'd thought burned away with his former life. Purpose, perhaps, or the simple human need to matter to someone, to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. He settled back against the door, rifle ready, and continued his vigil. Dawn would come, and with it decisions. But for now, in this circle of firelight and fragile peace, it was enough to simply guard their sleep. The wagon wheels groaned over the rutted road to Cedar Ridge as James helped Eliza onto the seat. 2 weeks had passed since he'd found her in the cave, and her feet had healed enough for short walks, though the deeper wounds still pained her. Sarah lay bundled in her arms, gazing at the world with those dark, solemn eyes. You sure about this? James asked, checking the horse's harness one more time. We need supplies, Eliza replied, though her voice carried tension. And I can't hide forever. Better to face it now. See what people know. James nodded, understanding her logic even as he disagreed with the risk. They discussed it for days, the need for proper food, cloth for the baby, medicine. His monthly trip to town was overdue, and going alone would leave her unprotected at the cabin. Keep your bonnet low, he advised, climbing up beside her. And let me do the talking. The journey took 3 hours through country that shifted from canyon to prairie. Eliza had fashioned a dress from one of James's old shirts and a blanket, the rough fabric hanging loose on her thin frame. She looked like what she was, a woman who'd been through hardship, but there was strength in her bearing now, a determination that hadn't been there when he'd first found her. Cedar Ridge appeared on the horizon, a collection of wooden buildings that seemed to crouch against the endless sky. Smoke rose from chimneys, and they could hear the ring of the blacksmith's hammer, the lowing of cattle in the stockyards. "It's smaller than Bitter Springs," Eliza observed. "Quieter, too. People mind their own business, mostly." But as they entered the main street, James noticed the looks, quick glances that lingered on Eliza, whispers behind raised hands. News traveled fast in frontier towns, carried by drovers and traveling peddlers. The story of a woman fleeing the Sullivan Ranch would have made good gossip. James pulled up outside Garrett's general store, setting the brake with deliberate calm. "Wait here," he told Eliza. "I'll get what we need." "No." Her chin lifted. "I won't cower. If they have something to say, let them say it to my face." He recognized the pride that wouldn't let her bend, even when bending might be wiser. "All right, but stay close." The store's interior was dim after the bright morning sun. Mrs. Garrett, a thin woman with sharp features, stood behind the counter. Her eyes widened as they entered, darting between James and Eliza like a bird spotting a snake. "Mr. Everett," she said, her voice pitched high. "Haven't seen you in a spell?" "Been busy," James replied shortly. "Need the usual supplies. Plus some cloth, cotton, if you have it." "Mrs." Garrett's gaze fixed on Eliza, taking in the rough dress, the baby, the healing scratches still visible on her arms. "Of course." "And for your companion?" "My business is my own, Mrs. Garrett." The woman flushed but began gathering supplies. Other customers filtered in, the minister's wife, 2 farmers' wives, a traveling tinker. Each stopped short at seeing Eliza, and the whispers began in earnest. "That's her," someone hissed. "The Sullivan woman. Heard she bewitched poor Thomas, running off with another man's baby. Cornelius put out word to every town in 50 miles. Eliza stood straighter with each whispered word, her face pale but composed. Sarah began to fuss. Sensing her mother's tension, James moved closer, his presence a silent warning that seemed to quiet the boldest gossips. Then the door burst open, and 3 men entered, rough types with trail dust on their clothes and guns on their hips. The leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, scanned the store until his gaze landed on Eliza. Well, he drawled. "Looks like we found our missing dove." James stepped between them and Eliza. "Something I can help you with?" The man smiled, showing yellowed teeth. "Name's Brock. Me and the boys been hired by Mr. Cornelius Sullivan to retrieve some stolen property. That woman there fits the description." "No property here," James said evenly. "Just folks buying supplies. Now, friend, no need for trouble." Brock's hand rested on his gun butt. "We got papers, all legal. That woman absconded with a Sullivan child. We're authorized to bring them both back. I'd like to see these papers." Brock pulled out a folded document, keeping his other hand near his weapon. James read it quickly. A writ claiming Eliza had stolen property and kidnapped a child belonging to the Sullivan family. It was signed by a judge in Bitter Springs, a man likely in Cornelius's pocket. "This isn't worth the paper it's written on," James said, handing it back. "The child is hers. That's for the law to decide. Back in Bitter Springs." "The law?" Eliza stepped around James, fury overcoming fear. "The law that lets a grandfather steal his son's child? The law that calls a widow a thief for protecting her baby?" Brock's eyes glittered dangerously. "You'll come quiet, or you'll come bloodied. Makes no difference to me." The store had gone dead silent. Everyone watched, waiting to see how this would play out. James felt the familiar calm that came before violence, his hand drifting toward his own gun. "The lady's not going anywhere," he said softly. 3 against 1. Friend, you sure you want to make this stand? I'm sure. The moment stretched taut. Then the minister, Reverend Dalton, stepped forward. Gentlemen, please, this is a house of commerce, not violence. Surely we can resolve this peacefully. Nothing to resolve, preacher, Brock said. We got legal papers. This man's interfering with the law. I know Cornelius Sullivan, another voice said. James turned to see Walter Hennessy, the town's doctor, moving through the crowd. Treated his son Thomas for fever 2 winters back. Also treated the bruises on his wife when she fell down the stairs, multiple times. Murmurs rippled through the store. Mrs. Garrett clutched her husband's arm, while others shifted uncomfortably. That's Sullivan business, Brock growled. Is it? Doctor. Hennessy moved to Eliza's side, examining her with professional interest. Ma'am, those wounds on your feet, they look like you ran a considerable distance without shoes. Why would a woman do that unless she was fleeing something terrible? Doc's right, another man said. Samuel Pratt, who ran the livery stable. I seen plenty of scared horses in my time. This woman's got the same look. Whatever she's running from, it ain't good. The tide was turning. James felt it in the air, the way the crowd's sympathies shifted. These were frontier people who understood desperation, who'd faced their own hardships. Don't matter what you all think, Brock said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. We got papers. Papers from a corrupt judge don't mean much out here. James said, you boys best head back to Bitter Springs. Tell Sullivan his daughter-in-law and grandchild are under protection now. Whose protection? Yours? Brock laughed, but it sounded forced. One man against the Sullivan family? Not just his. Doctor, Hennessy said quietly. Or mine, added Samuel Pratt. One by one. Others stepped forward. Not everyone. Some still hung back, unwilling to take sides. But enough to show that Cedar Ridge wouldn't be bullied by hired guns and questionable legal documents. Brock's face darkened. This ain't over. Sullivan's got influence. He'll bring real law next time. Federal marshals, maybe? You're just buying trouble for your whole town. We'll face that when it comes. Reverend Dalton said, for now, I think you gentlemen should leave. The 3 hired guns looked at each other, calculating odds. Whatever they saw in the faces around them convinced them. Brock spat on the floor, earning a sharp rebuke from Mrs. Garrett, then headed for the door. You tell that woman she can't run forever, he called over his shoulder. Sullivan always gets what's his. After they left, the store erupted in conversation. People pressed close, some offering sympathy to Eliza, others arguing about the wisdom of defying the Sullivans. Through it all, James kept one hand on Eliza's elbow, steadying her. Thank you, she whispered to Dr. Hennessy. The doctor smiled kindly. I took an oath to do no harm. Ma'am, sending you back to that family would violate that oath. He examined Sarah with gentle hands. Beautiful child. Bring her by my office before you leave town. I'd like to make sure she's thriving after your ordeal. They finished their shopping in a daze. Mrs. Garrett, perhaps feeling guilty for her earlier coldness, threw in extra cloth and a small toy for Sarah. Others offered advice, warnings, even a few coins pressed quietly into Eliza's hand. Outside, loading the wagon, Reverend Dalton approached. Mrs. Sullivan, I owe you an apology. When you came to my door that night, I failed in my Christian duty. Fear made a coward of me. Eliza studied him with those dark eyes that had seen too much. Fear makes cowards of many people. Reverend, at least you found courage today. As they drove out of Cedar Ridge, Eliza was quiet, processing what had happened. Sarah slept peacefully, unaware of the drama surrounding her small life. They'll be back, Eliza said finally. With more men, more papers. Probably, James agreed. Those people risked Sullivan's anger for me. Why? James considered his answer. Frontier folk understand running from something. Most of us came west to escape one thing or another. Maybe they saw themselves in you. And you, she turned to look at him. You've risked more than anyone. Why? He kept his eyes on the road. uncomfortable with the question. Already told you, didn't want to find bodies in my hunting grounds. That was 2 weeks ago. What's your reason now? The question hung between them like morning mist. James found himself thinking of Mary, of Benjamin, of all the people he'd failed to protect, but also of these 2 weeks, of evening conversations by the fire, of teaching Eliza to shoot his spare rifle, of watching her sing Sarah to sleep. Maybe, he said slowly, a man gets tired of having nothing but empty spaces in his life. She said nothing, but her hand found his arm, resting there light as a butterfly. They rode that way back to the canyon, toward the cabin that had become something more than just shelter. Behind them, Cedar Ridge buzzed with talk. The confrontation would be told and retold, growing with each telling. By nightfall, everyone would know that the town had stood against Sullivan-hired guns, that the mysterious James Everett had taken in the runaway woman and child. Change had come to their quiet corner of the frontier, and in a land where change usually meant trouble, people prepared for whatever storm might follow. The autumn rains came early that year, turning the canyon into a world of mist and rushing water. Inside the cabin, life had settled into quiet rhythms that felt both temporary and eternal. Eliza kneaded bread dough on the rough table, while Sarah played with wooden spoons on a blanket near the fire. James sat mending harness leather, his fingers sure despite the failing light. "She's trying to crawl," Eliza observed, watching her daughter push up on chubby arms. "Won't be long now. Better start thinking about making this place safer." James replied, "Lot of things here could hurt a curious little one." The domestic conversation felt natural now, though it had taken weeks to reach this ease. The first days after Cedar Ridge had been tense, both of them waiting for Sullivan's retaliation. But as summer faded into fall with no sign of pursuit, they'd relaxed into something resembling normal life. Eliza had transformed the Spartan cabin. Curtains made from flour sacks hung at the windows. Wildflowers filled a tin can on the table. She'd organized James's scattered belongings, mended his clothes, brought order to bachelor chaos. In return, he'd built shelves, improved the roof, fashioned a proper cradle for Sarah. "Your shirt's finished," Eliza said, gesturing to a neatly folded garment on the bed. That tear was trickier than it looked. James glanced at the shirt, one he'd torn on barbed wire while checking fences. She'd not only mended it, but reinforced all the seams, adding patches where the fabric had worn thin. Such care for something that belonged to him stirred feelings he wasn't ready to examine. "Thank you," he said simply. She smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed her face from merely pretty to beautiful. "It's the least I can do. You've given us so much. You've earned your keep," he protested. "This place hasn't been this comfortable since—" He stopped, old habit dying hard. "Since Mary," Eliza finished gently. "You can speak of her. You know, the dead don't mind being remembered." James set down the harness, surprised by her perception. "How did you—" "The way you sometimes start to say something and stop, the second cup by the wash basin that never gets used, the garden plot out back, overgrown but carefully laid out. A woman's planning." She shaped the dough with practiced movements. "And you knew too much about babies that first week. A man learns that from experience. You're observant. Survival skill." Her tone was light, but truth weighted the words. They worked in companionable silence as rain drummed on the roof. Sarah succeeded in propelling herself backward, prompting frustrated squeals until Eliza scooped her up. "She's got your determination," James observed. "Heaven help her then." Eliza settled into the rocking chair he'd repaired. Sarah on her lap. "Will you tell me about them? Mary and Benjamin." The question should have hurt, but somehow it didn't. Maybe because Eliza asked not from curiosity but from understanding. One grieving soul recognizing another. "Mary was a schoolteacher's daughter from Virginia," he began slowly. "Proper lady. No business marrying a Texas farmer, but she said I made her laugh." His mouth quirked at the memory. "Benjamin came along 2 years later, curious about everything, always into mischief. He'd have been 12 now." "What happened?" Fever took them while I was away fighting a war that seems foolish now. Mary's letters stopped coming, and I told myself it was the mail routes disrupted. Found out different when I came home. He stared into the fire. Neighbors said she held on long as she could, nursing Benjamin. They went within hours of each other. Eliza reached out, her hand covering his. I'm sorry. Long time ago. No, she said softly. It wasn't. The rain intensified, turning the world beyond the windows into a blur. Sarah had fallen asleep, her small body relaxed in perfect trust. The scene was so domestic, so achingly familiar yet different, that James felt something shift inside his chest. Sometimes, Eliza said, I think the dead would want us to... She stopped, color rising in her cheeks. To what? Nothing. Foolish thoughts. But James thought he knew what she'd almost said. The same thought had been creeping into his own mind during these quiet evenings, these shared meals and conversations. The possibility of something beyond mere survival. A loud crack of thunder made them both jump. Sarah woke crying, and Eliza soothed her with practiced ease. James rose to check the windows, making sure the rain wasn't coming in. Storm's getting worse, he noted. We're safe here, though. It wasn't a question. In these months, Eliza had come to trust the cabin's solid walls, the man who'd built them, as if to challenge her words. They heard something above the storm, horses approaching fast. James grabbed his rifle, motioning Eliza to take Sarah into the corner farthest from the door. Maybe it's nothing, she whispered, but her face had gone pale. James peered through the window. 3 riders appeared through the rain, slumped in their saddles. As they drew closer, he relaxed slightly. Not Sullivan men. Looks like travelers caught in the storm. The lead rider called out, Hello, the cabin. We need shelter. James recognized the voice. Tom Morrison from Cedar Ridge, a good man who'd stood up for Eliza in the store. He unbarred the door, though he kept the rifle handy. Morrison and 2 companions stumbled inside, soaked and shivering. Sorry to impose. Everett, storm caught us coming back from Fort Worth. Horses are about done in. You're welcome here, James said. Eliza, could you heat some coffee? She moved efficiently, stoking the fire and setting the pot to boil. The 3 men huddled near the hearth, gratitude plain on their faces. Obliged, ma'am, Morrison said. Didn't expect to find you folks. Heard you might have moved on. Why would you hear that? James asked sharply. Morrison exchanged glances with his companions. Well, seeing as there's been strangers asking around, not Sullivan men, leastwise, not openly, but asking questions about a woman and baby. Offering good money for information? Eliza's hand stilled on the coffee pot. When? Past 2 weeks. They're being subtle about it, but... Morrison shrugged. Thought you should know. The comfortable evening shattered like glass. James saw the fear creep back into Eliza's eyes. The tension returned to her shoulders. Their peaceful interlude had been just that, an interlude. We appreciate the warning, James said quietly. The storm raged for hours. Morrison and his friends dried out by the fire, sharing news from town, carefully avoiding further mention of the strangers. But the damage was done. The easy conversation of earlier was replaced by strained politeness. When the rain finally slackened near midnight, the visitors prepared to leave despite James's offer to stay till morning. Best we move on, Morrison said. Our families will worry. He paused at the door. Everett, if you need help, any kind of help, you know where to find us. After they left, James barred the door and turned to find Eliza standing by Sarah's cradle, tears streaming down her face. I was foolish to think it could last, she whispered. This peace, this happiness. It's not over, James said firmly. Isn't it? She faced him, anguish clear in her expression. They'll never stop. I'll never be free of them. And I've put you in danger, made you a target too. That was my choice. Was it? Or did I manipulate a lonely man's kindness? The self-loathing in her voice made him flinch. I should leave. Take Sarah and go before... Where? James interrupted. Where would you go that would be safer than here? She had no answer. They both knew the truth. There was nowhere. The frontier was vast, but not infinite. The Sullivan reach was long, their memory longer. "I won't let you blame yourself," James said, moving closer. "You didn't manipulate anything. You needed help. I gave it. And these months—" He struggled for words. "They haven't been a burden. They've been—" "What?" Her voice was barely a whisper. He thought of empty evenings filled with conversation, of teaching her to shoot while she laughed at her poor aim, of watching her create a home from his bare shelter, of the way his heart lifted when he returned from hunting to find her there. Sarah in her arms, both faces lighting up at his arrival. "They've been the best months I've had in 5 years," he admitted. Something shifted in her expression. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the tears still clinging to her lashes. "James!" A coyote howled outside, breaking the moment. Sarah stirred in her sleep, and Eliza moved automatically to check on her. The space between them filled up again with unspoken words. "We should sleep," James said roughly. "Tomorrow we'll need to make plans." "Yes," Eliza agreed, though her eyes said more. James took his usual position by the door, rifle close at hand, but sleep didn't come easily. He listened to the sounds of Eliza settling for the night, the soft rustle of blankets, her quiet breathing. The cabin felt different now, not just because danger had crept back to their doorstep, but because something fundamental had changed between them. In the darkness, he heard her whisper, "James, I've been happy here too, happier than I thought I'd ever be again." He didn't trust himself to answer, but as the night deepened and the storm moved on, leaving stars in its wake, James allowed himself to imagine a future where happiness wasn't just an interlude, but a possibility. Outside, the canyon creek ran high with rainwater, its voice a constant murmur. The world went on as it always had, indifferent to human hopes and fears. But inside the cabin, 2 damaged souls had found something worth protecting, worth fighting for. Tomorrow would bring decisions and dangers. But tonight, with Sarah safe in her cradle and Eliza's presence warming the darkness, James kept watch and dared to hope. The ancient oak stood at the edge of James's property, its massive trunk scarred by lightning and time. Beneath its spreading branches, wildflowers grew in defiance of the autumn chill. It was here that James brought Eliza on a clear morning 3 days after Morrison's warning, while Sarah napped in the cabin under the watchful eye of Mrs. Chen, a neighbor woman who'd arrived unexpectedly the day before. "Why here?" Eliza asked, looking up at the golden leaves that clung stubbornly to the branches. James dismounted and helped her down from Dusty. "This tree was here when I first came to the canyon, stood through storms that leveled everything else. Seemed like a good place for important words." She studied him, noting the formal set of his shoulders, the way he'd shaved carefully that morning and worn his best shirt. "James!" "What?" "Let me speak first," he said, taking her hands. His palms were calloused but gentle. "I've been thinking about what Morrison said, about the strangers asking questions, about what comes next. We agreed we'd have to leave," Eliza said quietly. "Go deeper into the territories. Maybe New Mexico. Running's not a life, not for you, not for Sarah." He took a breath, steadying himself. "There's another way, maybe not perfect, but it would give you legal protection." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "James, hear me out." His grip on her hands tightened slightly. "If we married, properly married, with papers and witnesses, the law would recognize me as Sarah's father. Sullivan would have no claim. A man can't steal his own legal daughter." Eliza pulled her hands free, stepping back. "You're offering to marry me out of pity?" "No." The word came fierce and immediate. "I'm offering because—" He struggled, this man more comfortable with actions than words. "Because these months have shown me what I've been missing. Because watching you with Sarah, seeing you make my empty cabin into a home, hearing your voice when I come through the door, it's brought me back to life. James, I know I'm not what you probably dreamed of. I'm older, set in my ways. I've got ghosts that sometimes make me poor company. But I'd be good to you, Eliza, to both of you. I'd work every day to make sure you never regretted it." She turned away, arms wrapped around herself. "You don't understand. I'm grateful, more grateful than you know. But marriage, I failed at it once. Thomas and I, we married for the wrong reasons. He wanted to spite his father by choosing a saloon singer's daughter. I wanted security, respectability. We made each other miserable. This would be different. Would it?" She faced him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Or would you wake up one day and resent being saddled with another man's child and a woman who brought nothing but trouble to your door?" James moved closer, close enough to see the pulse beating at her throat. "You think I haven't asked myself those questions? But I keep coming back to one truth. My life is better with you in it. Not easier, maybe, but better. Worth living again. And if the strangers Morrison mentioned are Sullivan men, if marrying me brings their full wrath down on you, then we face it together. That's what marriage means, facing whatever comes, together." Eliza studied his face, searching for doubt, for hesitation. Finding none seemed to frighten her more than finding it would have. "And Sarah, can you truly accept another man's child as your own?" For answer, James pulled out a small wooden horse from his pocket, carved with patient skill. Been working on this for her, planning a whole set, cows, sheep, even a little barn. Girl needs toys. His voice roughened. "I already think of her as mine. Eliza, the heart doesn't always follow blood." That broke through her defenses. Tears spilled over as she took the little horse, running her fingers over its smooth curves. "You made this?" "Long winter evenings. Had to do something with my hands while you were mending." He attempted lightness, but couldn't quite manage it. "I'm not asking for what you had with Thomas. I'm not asking you to feel something that's not there. Just let me protect you. Both of you. Let me give you my name. Make you safe. The rest, we can figure that out as we go." Eliza looked up at the oak tree, its branches reaching toward the sky like prayers. "My mother used to say that marriage was like planting a tree. You had to have faith it would grow, even when it was just a stick in the ground." "Your mother sounds wise." "She was." Eliza turned the wooden horse over in her hands. "She also said that gratitude was no foundation for a marriage." "Good thing that's not what this is, then, isn't it?" James caught her chin gently, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. "Do you think I'd offer marriage to just anyone who needed help? Do you think what I feel when I watch you sing Sarah to sleep is just gratitude? Or when you laugh at my poor attempts at humor? When you trust me enough to fall asleep while I keep watch? What do you feel?" The question came out breathless. He struggled again with words. This man who'd locked his heart away for so long. Like spring after a long winter. Like color returning to a gray world. Like... He stopped, frustrated with his inadequacy. "I'm no poet, Eliza. But I know what I feel is real. Maybe it's not the passionate love of youth, but it's strong and steady. It would last." She searched his face for a long moment, then asked quietly, "And what do you think I feel?" "I hope," he said carefully, "that you feel safe with me, that maybe you found some peace here, some happiness. That perhaps, given time, you might come to feel more..." A smile touched her lips, sad and sweet. "Oh, James, for such an observant man, you can be quite blind." She reached up, touching his cheek with trembling fingers. "Do you think I mended your shirts with such care out of duty? That I watch for you from the window because I'm bored? That my heart doesn't race when you walk through the door, safe from another day's dangers?" Hope bloomed in his chest, painful in its intensity. "Eliza, I've been afraid to name it," she continued. "Afraid that admitting it would somehow curse it. But if we're speaking truths under this oak tree..." She took a shaky breath. "I love you, James Everett. Not with the wild, reckless feeling I mistook for love with Thomas. This is quieter, deeper, like a creek that looks shallow until you wade in and find it'll carry you away." James cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away her tears. "Then marry me. Not for protection, not for Sarah, though those matter too. Marry me because I love you, and you love me. And that's Reason enough. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. He kissed her then. Their first kiss, under the oak tree with the morning sun warming their faces. It was gentle, a promise more than passion. But Eliza felt it down to her bones, the rightness of it, the feeling of coming home. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, James rested his forehead against hers. We'll go to town tomorrow. Find the judge. Make it legal. The whole town will know within hours. Good. Let them know. Let word spread all the way to Bitter Springs. His arms tightened around her. Let Cornelia Sullivan know that Eliza and Sarah Everett are under my protection now. She smiled at the sound of her new name-to-be. Sarah Everett. It suits her. It suits you both. They stood there a while longer, holding each other beneath the oak tree. The world beyond their canyon haven was still dangerous, still full of threats. But in this moment, with promises made and love acknowledged, they were stronger than any storm that might come. We should get back, Eliza said eventually. Mrs. Chen will wonder what's keeping us. Let her wonder, James replied, but he helped her mount Dusty anyway. As they rode back toward the cabin, Eliza asked, Where will we have the ceremony? James considered. Here, if you're willing, under the oak. Reverend Dalton would come out from town. I think, bring witnesses. I'd like that. She leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest. A simple ceremony, but real, honest, like us. He agreed. They found Mrs. Chen playing with Sarah on the cabin floor, both of them giggling over some baby game. The older woman looked up with knowing eyes, taking in their joined hands, the new lightness in their faces. Good, she said simply. About time. This baby needs a proper father, and you two need to stop dancing around each other like shy youngsters. Eliza blushed, but James just grinned. Would you stand witness, Mrs. Chen? We're planning a wedding. Of course. My husband, too, if you'll have us. When? Soon as possible, James said. Day after tomorrow. If the Reverend can manage it. Mrs. Chen beamed. I'll make my special dumplings. And a cake. Every wedding needs cake. As the women fell into wedding planning, simple as it would be, James picked up Sarah, who grabbed for his nose with chubby fingers. What do you think, little one? Want me for a papa? Sarah babbled something that sounded like agreement, then stuffed his shirt collar in her mouth. James took that as a yes. Outside, the oak tree stood sentinel over the canyon, its roots deep and branches high. Like the love that had grown between two wounded souls, it had weathered storms and would weather more. But it stood strong, ready for whatever seasons lay ahead. The decision was made. Under that ancient oak, two lives would formally become one, creating a family not from blood but from choice, not from passion alone, but from the steady, enduring love that grows when two people choose to face the world together. Tomorrow would bring the trip to town, the legal ceremonies, the inevitable spread of news, but tonight, in their canyon home, they were simply James and Eliza and Sarah, a family in all but law, soon to be complete in every way that mattered. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold, with frost silvering the canyon grass. Eliza stood before the small mirror James had hung for her, wearing the blue dress Mrs. Chen had altered from one of her own. It wasn't fancy, nothing in their life was, but it was clean and fitted well, and the color brought out the warmth in her dark eyes. Sarah sat on the bed, dressed in a tiny gown sewn from the soft cotton they'd bought in Cedar Ridge, watching her mother with solemn attention. Your papa's waiting for us, Eliza told her daughter, the words still feeling miraculous on her tongue. Your real papa, the one who chose us. Through the window, she could see the oak tree decorated with autumn wildflowers and ribbons donated by the townswomen. A small gathering had formed. Dr. Hennessy and his wife, the Chens, Tom Morrison and his family, even gruff Samuel Pratt from the livery. Reverend Dalton stood beneath the tree in his formal black coat, Bible in hand, and James. James waited there in his Sunday best, hair carefully combed, boots shined. Even from this distance, she could see the way he stood, solid, sure, unchangeable as the mountains, her anchor in every storm. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Chen entered, beaming. "The Reverend's ready when you are." "Oh, don't you look lovely? And little Sarah, like a princess." "I'm nervous," Eliza admitted. "Is that foolish? I've been married before. That wasn't a marriage child. That was a business arrangement that went sour." Mrs. Chen adjusted Eliza's collar with motherly care. "This is different. This is two people choosing each other, building something real." "What if—" Eliza stopped, old fears rising. "What if what? That man out there loves you something fierce. Anyone can see it. And you'll love him right back." Mrs. Chen picked up Sarah, settling her on one hip. "Now come on, your future's waiting." They walked together to the oak tree, where the small congregation parted to let them through. Eliza's eyes found James immediately, saw the wonder in his face as he looked at her, the way his hands trembled slightly when he reached for hers. "You're beautiful," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "You clean up pretty well yourself, Cowboy." That earned her a smile, easing the solemnity of the moment. Reverend Dalton cleared his throat, beginning the simple ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we gather here under God's wide sky to witness the joining of James and Eliza in holy matrimony." The words washed over Eliza like a benediction. This was so different from her first wedding. No drunken groom, no disapproving family, no sense of settling for less than she deserved. James's hands were steady now, warm and calloused, holding hers like something precious. "James Everett," the Reverend continued, "do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" "I do," James's voice carried across the canyon, strong and certain. "Eliza May Sullivan, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she said before he could finish, earning gentle laughter from the witnesses. "And who stands for this child?" Reverend Dalton asked. James stepped forward. "I do. I claim Sarah as my daughter, to raise and protect as my own, to give her my name and my love for all her days." Eliza's eyes burned with tears. They'd discussed this, James's formal adoption of Sarah as part of the ceremony. It wasn't strictly traditional, but Reverend Dalton had agreed it was fitting. "Then, by the power vested in me, by God and the territory of Texas, I pronounce you husband and wife, and I recognize before these witnesses that Sarah is now Sarah Everett, daughter of James and Eliza Everett. James, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was different from their first under this same tree, deeper, surer, a seal on promises made. When they parted, Eliza saw her own joy reflected in James's eyes. Then chaos erupted. "Stop this blasphemy!" The voice cracked like a whip across the celebration. Cornelius Sullivan sat his horse at the edge of the clearing, flanked by 6 armed men. His face was twisted with rage, his expensive suit dusty from hard riding. James stepped in front of Eliza and Sarah, hand moving to his gun. The wedding guests scattered, women pulling children behind cover. But Tom Morrison and Samuel Pratt moved to flank James, their own weapons visible. "You're too late, Sullivan," James said calmly. "It's done, legal and witnessed." "Legal?" Cornelius spat. "A whore stealing my grandchild and hiding behind some saddle tramp? I'll see you both hanged. Watch your tongue." "Doctor," Hennessy stepped forward, surprising everyone. "There are ladies present, and you'll address Mrs. Everett with respect." "Mrs. Everett?" Cornelius's laugh was ugly. "She's no more married than I performed the ceremony myself." Reverend Dalton interrupted, holding up the marriage certificate. "Before God and these witnesses, it's done. Mr. Sullivan, your son's widow has remarried, and her husband has legally adopted the child. You have no claim here. That child carries Sullivan blood." "And Everett name," James replied. "My daughter now, in law and love. Accept it and leave in peace." For a moment, violence trembled in the air. Cornelius's men shifted restlessly, hands near weapons, but they were outnumbered now, More townspeople had appeared, drawn by the commotion, forming a protective circle around the wedding party. "This isn't over," Cornelius snarled. "You think you've won? I'll contest this in every court." "Try it," James said. "Waste your money on lawyers. Won't change the facts. Eliza is my wife, Sarah is my daughter, and you're trespassing on my land." Something in James's voice, the absolute certainty, the willingness to die for his new family, must have penetrated Cornelius's rage. The older man's face went purple, then white. "You've made an enemy today, Everett. The Sullivan family doesn't forget." "Neither do I," James replied steadily. "Remember that if you ever think of coming near my family again." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Cornelius wheeled his horse around. "We're leaving, but this isn't finished." The Sullivan men rode away, dust rising in their wake. The wedding party waited until they were out of sight before anyone moved. "Well, Mrs. Chen said brightly, "that was exciting. Now, who wants cake?" The tension broke in nervous laughter. People pressed forward to congratulate the newlyweds, to admire Sarah in her fancy dress, to shake James's hand and tell him he'd done right. But Eliza saw the watchfulness that didn't leave James's eyes, the way he kept her and Sarah close. The confrontation had been inevitable, but it cast a shadow over what should have been pure joy. Later, after the guests had gone and Sarah was napping, Eliza found James standing by the window, staring out at the canyon. "He meant it," she said quietly. "He won't give up." "I know." James turned to her, pulling her into his arms. "But he's wrong about one thing. This is finished. He can rage and threaten all he wants. Doesn't change what we did today. I brought this trouble to you. On our wedding day." "Our wedding day," he interrupted, "was perfect. You married me. I claimed Sarah. We're a family now. The rest is just noise." She leaned into his strength, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, James Everett." "And I love you, Eliza Everett." He smiled at her reaction to her new name. "Better get used to it. You're stuck with it now." "Gladly." As evening painted the canyon in shades of gold and purple, they sat together on the porch James had recently added to the cabin. Sarah played between them, babbling happily, unaware of the drama surrounding her small life. "She'll never remember any other father," Eliza said softly. "Good. I plan to be the only one that matters." James tickled Sarah's belly, earning delighted giggles. Going to teach her to ride, to shoot, to read the weather. Everything a father should. And if Cornelius, then we'll face it, together, like we promised. He caught her hand, threading their fingers together. "I meant those vows. Eliza, every word." "So did I." A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals above the canyon. The world was still dangerous, still full of men like Cornelius Sullivan who believed money and power gave them rights to other people's lives. But here in their hidden canyon, a new family had formed. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real and strong and theirs. "Look," James pointed to the horizon where the first stars were appearing. "Sarah's stars. Make a wish, little one." Sarah reached for the sky with chubby hands, as if she could catch the stars. Her parents watched, their own wishes silent but shared, for peace, for time, for the chance to build their life without looking over their shoulders. The stars brightened, indifferent to human hopes but beautiful nonetheless. And in the cabin that had become a home, 3 hearts beat as one family, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. The wedding was over, but the marriage, the real work of building a life together, had just begun. And despite the threats and shadows, despite the long road that had brought them here, Eliza felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt hope. The night deepened around them, bringing the desert cold, but the warmth between them held it at bay. Inside, the fire crackled cheerfully, waiting to welcome them, their first night as husband and wife, as a true family. "Come on," James said, standing and lifting Sarah with one arm while pulling Eliza up with the other. "Let's go home." Home. The words settled around them like a blessing. Whatever storms might come, they would weather them from here, from this cabin in the canyon, under the watchful oak, beneath the endless Texas stars, together.